This program is brought to you by 3C TV. Like what you learned? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up on the latest 3C TV programs.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Assemblymember Rocky Chavez. A retired Marine colonel, he represents the 76th Assembly District. Prior to his election last year, he served as Undersecretary and Acting Director of CalVet. Colonel Chavez is currently on the Assembly Budget Committee, on the Assembly Higher Education Committee, and as Vice Chair of the Veterans Committee. Earlier this year, one of our student assistants, Felipe Grimaldo, a veteran, invited me and David Lawrence to join him in his meeting with Assemblymember Chavez. Colonel Chavez was generous with his time and greeted us warmly, as did his staff. He talked to Felipe about his own experience attending El Camino Community College before transferring to Chico State and joining the Marines. He also talked about AB 13, his bill to provide in-state tuition to all veterans. He allowed me to bluntly tell him that he would have support openly, but behind the scenes it would be quite a struggle. Throughout this year, I've watched him testify in his bill with passion and have seen him work with any member on any issue. I have worked in government relations for over a decade, and this year I got my first thank you letter from an assembly member for testifying in support of a bill. That, of course, from Rocky Chavez. I mention these two stories to share some insight into who Mr. Chavez is and what his character is beyond his bio. He is a Marine, he is a community college student, he is someone who offers his hand to help others. In short, he is one of you, he is one of our students. And now, Assemblymember Rocky Chavez.
Wow. I got to ask this question. Is anybody here from El Camino Community College? Where? Over here. I tell you, I love that place. Used to ride my bike down there when I came out of Torrance High School to go there. And this morning I was at Maricosta Community College in Oceanside, and it had a Hispanic outreach effort going on. So I was there earlier this morning at 7:30 for breakfast. And we were talking about education, and I was telling them that when I went to El Camino, then junior college, I took 60 hours, not 61, not 69, 60 hours, and left there with an AA in English and went on to a state college. And I could tell you in my entire education, some of the best teachers I ever had was at El Camino Junior College. So I don't know if anybody's still there, but I love that place. You guys had to invite me back. I could brag about the place forever. I was also the captain of your wrestling team there, but it was a hell of a place to be. I really wanted to come talk to you about veterans, but I thought what I would do was tie it in more to who's serving in the military. You know, in the military, there's a lot of misconceptions. I remember sitting on a plane one time with a lady when I was the undersecretary, and she was telling me that she really was sorry for the veterans because the young women and men who went to serve in the military had no other options. And I looked at her and I said, "God, why would you say that?" And she goes, "Well, think about it. Why would you even go in unless you had no other options?" And I looked at her and I said, "Do you know if you lined up 10 18-year-olds, there'd be 2 or 3 of them that could actually go in. But in choosing to go there, only about 1% of our population even goes in. For example, you have to have the way they recruit, now you did recruiting for a number of years. The way they recruit, you got Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 1 is you got to have a high school diploma. Tier 2 means that you can have a GED, but the services have different criteria. The Army has to have, they'll take 10% of the recruitment element at a Tier 2. The Marine Corps does a 5%. The Air Force does a 1%. Navy does a 5%. Marine Corps does a 2%. Army does a 1%. And the Coast Guard won't even take you at a Tier 2 unless you have 15 hours of college. So you're talking a very high bar knowing how many kids actually even graduate with have a high school diploma. Then if you look at it and you say, you have to be physically fit. You can't be a hostess doughboy. You look at a number of kids running around that don't work out nowadays. A lot of them can't even pass the physical. And then I said, then you have to pass a medical. I was telling her, I said, you know, you can't have asthma. You know, can't have hearing problems. You can't have good eyesight. And she goes, well, I have asthma. And I said, yeah, you'd be a failure. We wouldn't let you in the Marine Corps. And then you got to be somebody who's never been involved with the police, with drugs or alcohol. You got to have really a good record. So when you put all that criteria together, recruiters have to find those 2 or 3 people to go into the military. Then you look at it and said, oh, because I hit this a lot in the Hispanic community. Oh, only Hispanics are heavily serving in the military. They're the ground troops. Well, you know, that's not true. The number one cache of group of people who are officers, and officers command the troops, that are beyond their percent are blacks. There are more black officers than any other percent of officers, and so they're the ones leading our services. You know, Hispanics serve in a lot of different MOSs in the military. There's a lot of people don't know that in the military, if you look at where they come from economically, by about a 5-to-1 ratio, more of them come from the middle and higher up income strand than the lower since 9/11. So it's not the poor, it's those who have other choices. I like to tell everybody that the veterans are the best that we have from our society who go serve. There's another story that a lot of people say, oh, they go in and they're going to go 20 years, they're going to retirement, they're going to get all these great things. The reality is less than probably about 6% make that 20-year mark. The vast majority of the enlisted move out after the first term because they went in to serve their country for a lot of different reasons. Maybe they just want to get out of the house. But they serve, and they come out, and they want to go to college. As you probably know, that if you look at where they go to college, 80% of the veterans choose a community college. 80%. You are the pathway to the future of our economics of our state. You are for veterans. I was talking to Francisco Rodriguez, the president of Maricosta College last night, getting ready for this morning breakfast, and he was telling me that 10% of his population is veterans. 10%. And that he sees the quality of education, experience, and discussion has dramatically improved because of the veterans there. Because they're not the kids who are just coming out of high school that or, you know, for whatever reason want to stay home and are going to go there. These are people who have made a decision that they're going somewhere, and they bring that to the community colleges, and they raise the discussions. I remember talking to the president of San Diego State when they had a problem with the fraternities down in San Diego State, because anybody from San Diego State area? I don't want to piss in. Okay. Well, they have a reputation. I'm from Chico State, so I think you overtook us, but we had a good reputation. Yeah, you know what I mean. So so San Diego State had this issue where the fraternities are just having a grand old time. So to settle it down, they took the biggest fraternity that had a big party there, and they kind of kicked them off campus and made it a vet house and put the veterans in there, and he said, calm the whole street down. So they add a lot of quality to the quality of life at a campus. So who you think goes into the military is not what a lot of people think. Where do they go? They go into the community colleges. And where are they going to go from there? They're either going to go into a trade or they're going to go off to a university and continue their education. Some of you may have heard me say this before. Back when I was the undersecretary, there was a book that had just come out of Stanford, and it talked about Startup Nation. Anybody read that book? One? Okay, I can talk about it then. Startup Nation, the thesis of this book was that they were looking at a country that was #1 in the world for startup businesses, #1 in the world for worldwide investments in a particular region for new technology. And this one country was a little country in the Middle East called Israel. And one of the reasons their thesis was is because everybody in Israel has to go into the military. And through the military, you learn how to work as a team. You understand it's not about you. It's a process. And in the military, you learn how to fail. And fail's okay. What's not okay is to stop. And that attitude of an entrepreneur, hardworking, driving till it's done, they tell stories in there how some of their companies, when they were being shot at and bombs are blowing up, people would still come to work to get the job done and make it happen. That's what the military drive provided to Israel to be one of the strongest economies. Now let me ask you some of the history. At the end of World War II, when we took everybody and 45% off to the military somewhere serving, when the war was over, and thinking about it, we'd just come out of a depression. We went into a world war, and all these people came back. And where did they go? What happened that allowed them to do something? The GI Bill. My father was a migrant. He worked in the fields. He had a 5th grade education. At least he said he did. I don't know. But he went, when World War II started, after Pearl Harbor, he joined the Marine Corps, went off. At the end of World War II, he went to Guadalcanal, Tinian, Tarawa, Saipan, Okinawa. You may have heard a couple of those battles. Came back. I remember as a young kid, he was working at the U.S. Steel Mill. I lived in the barrio out there, and it was kind of cool area as a young kid to be brought up because you had pigs and chickens and things running around the streets and dirt streets, and I loved it as a place. My best friend's name was Carrie Bug. He was one of the Okies that was living there. It was the Okies and the Mexicans all living together, parents working at U.S. Steel. My father would come home at night, and my mother would give him tortillas, and he'd run off to El Camino Junior College. And he started getting some education. And when the aerospace industry kicked off in 1956, 57, he got a job in an aerospace industry. And we moved from the barrio, where I used to play with the chickens and pigs and have a great old time, to a place called Torrance, where we had sidewalks. So his example, that's what community colleges do. That's what it does for veterans. So the same thing that they were talking about in startup nations in Israel is the same thing we did in California at the end of World War II. I submit to you, with the Iraq-Afghanistan war going on, as I identified in the beginning of my discussion, the best and brightest are serving in the military. They're coming back to your schools, and they're going to be the engine that are going to redrive the society of California. I also sit on the governor's committee to keep the military in California. We'll be meeting next week in LA. When I talked to the governor and he was saying, why do I even want a military here? I told him, you know, your father's legacy was putting water and freeways in the state of California. Your legacy is going to improve and re-engineer the educational institutions in California to train our people, and a good component of them are veterans, to rebuild the economy of California. I firmly believe that. I've told him that a few times. I don't know if he's going to listen to me. I'm just Rocky. But the point is, what you're doing is critically important right now if you look at a historical perspective of a world of economy. Everybody saw the reports that just came out this week, how the United States is doing in a world economy. We need to do better. And I think the catalyst will come from the veterans. So that was kind of my message, and I'm looking at all your eyes, and no one's moved on. So now I'm going to do what Rocky always likes to do. I like to ask a question, and I'll tie it into some of my mess with them. Does anybody have a question for me they'd like to ask? Yes, sir. One of the questions he said he'd like me to do is to allow priority registration for all veterans, regardless of the time and service they've had. We've had that discussion. AB 13 was trying to do that. When I used to run around the state, one of the things I found very interesting is that if you're in Orange County, even around here, Long Beach, because there used to be a large military contingency in this area, and in San Diego, or if you get around Sacramento where the Air Force was, if you get up where the Army used to be, up in Monterey, you'll have cantonments of really strong military support. You'll see it a little bit in Riverside where the Air Force is out there. You still see that there. But you'll go to other places, it's not there. I remember talking to a senator, I'll even drop her name, Senator Lou, who when I met with her said, "Why do I want to do this for veterans?" I looked at her and I said, well, you were able, I said, I'm a big supporter of the DREAM Act. I'm supportive of all children having the opportunity of education. So as a Republican, I'm out there saying, I want all children to be educated. But I also got to tell you, if we can give that to the children who were brought up here, we can also do it for our veterans. And I lost that vote. She actually killed it in the Appropriates Committee. Now, we're coming back. We're not done yet. We're going to come back. I talked to some people, some smart people, and they said if you made it so that it would be permissible for the presidents of the different community colleges to do that, then we can let AB 13 go through, and we'll probably get it through. So we're going to come back and try to do that. You'll see that in the January, February timeframe, and I'm sure a lot of you will be fighting with me to make that happen. But, sir, you're exactly right for the priority registration. I made the argument, one of the reasons I also was able to get through El Camino in 60 hours is I was a jock. And so I never had to ever pull a card. My coach would just come to me and say, here's your list of classes, Rocky. You're going to be next to da-da-da-da. And I got that 2 weeks before anybody knew what was going to go on because I was a jock. I had priority registration. If we can do it for a knucklehead who was a wrestler, we could do it for somebody who has actually served our country. So I agree with you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Non-residency as far, she asked a question, can we take the non-resident portion? I assume you're talking about AB 13? The non-residency portion, so that you would just recognize it for Californians?
No, I mean just anybody, any veteran who has the honorable discharge and other.
That's what we did. That's what AB 13 did.
So they have removed the residency part?
That's what we did. We removed the residency requirement, but they couldn't get it through. And we had it actually, this was probably the best telling point. We had a presentation done. There was 2 young Army enlisted. The lady was from California. The boy was from the Midwest, somewhere in the Midwest. They met in Alabama. They get married. They served, both of them served like in Iraq or Afghanistan, 2 or 3 tours. They got married. They saved their money, and they wanted to come back to California and go to college. And they had saved something like $6,000 or $8,000, whatever it was. And they were going to use that to put a down payment on a house, and they were going to use their GI Bill together, both of them, to go to college. She could do it because she was from California. He couldn't do it because he was from the Midwest. So they had to use their money that they had saved together to pay for his college for the first year until he became a resident while they lived in their parents' basement. Think about that. Young couple, serve their country, save their money, do everything right, and they had to use their savings. Instead of having their own house where they could live and go to college, they get to live in their parents' basement. That was actually a testimony to Senator Lou when she said no. So that was, to me, it was just like, you know, what planet Earth do you come from? But that was it. Any other questions or? Yes, sir. The question is, we're looking at doing veteran resource centers at all the campuses. Is there any categorical funding for it? Actually, has anybody heard the issue of social impact bonds? It's a big issue out in New York putting together. Basically, if you can show that there's a social impact, a positive social impact for bonds, that you put a business plan together, you can get the money to do it, then you have to, from the savings that you receive, goes back to pay off the bonds. We're going to be doing it for looking at veterans courts. I'm doing a thing with Admiral Froman down in San Diego to look at a thing called Reboot, going statewide. Right now, we send a lot of money to EDD to get employment for veterans, but it hasn't been very effective. It's like at the 20% level. The Reboot has a 95% success rate on getting people jobs. So Reboot's saying, instead of giving to EDD, give it to me, and so the social impact bonds will pay for that, start it up. The veteran centers, what you have right there, I think there's nothing on categorical funding for it. It's, when I was talking to Francisco, one of the things he did very well in Maricosta that you may want to talk to him about, he actually has a full-time federal employee from the VA on his campus, providing all the resources to the veterans, and they bring everything to it. I would recommend that probably a better way. Another thought I have is this, is that California has 10% of the veterans, right? We get 7.5% of the money from the feds. The federal VA is actually responsible to take care of veterans. The VA, when I was running the show a couple of years ago, $133 billion a year. We lose 2.5% of $133 billion a year. That's real money. That's $4 billion. What we need to do, and I'm meeting with Secretary Gravitt next week, is that we need to look at how we can go get those federal funds to come back. And one of the things we're looking at is veteran courts, transition, and your centers on your campuses. If we can some way get that driven to the feds to bring the money here, like Francisco did at Maricosta, if we could have a VA rep, whatever percent is, I don't know what the percent of veterans on your campus is. Francisco hit 10% was to be able to do it. But if it works a full-time equivalent, then you should be able, we can push from our side, people like me, to the feds to get you an employee. So that, you know, a full-time employee with all the resources from the VA would be, I think, a great thing for your programs. Yes, ma'am. I hear what you're saying. Well, I'm happy you're doing that, because I was at Long Beach State about 2-3 years ago looking at, like, over here, looking at your facility, what you're doing for it. And the first place I actually saw where I really like it was Saddleback. Are they here? Saddleback. I mean, these guys are amazing what they're pulling down. They had a whole wing almost. And then San Diego State, what they're doing. Your quiet places, especially for the PTSD and for women, for sexual trauma sites and things like that, is very critical. Short answer to your question, yes, I'd like to work on the funding. My point is this. We, as California taxpayers, are paying money to the feds to take care of the feds. Then what California politicians, people like me, what they do is they go, oh, we're going to get a new vet program, and they get all the hats and they get the students, and we make a California unique program. Thereby, we as taxpayers pay California to take care of our veterans, instead of me as a policymaker working with the secretary of the California Department of Veteran Affairs, because I used to be him, and going to the feds and saying, this is a requirement that needs to be met in our state. We're losing 2.5% of our revenue to our state for our veterans. Instead of taxing us twice, give me my money and allow me to take care of my veterans. That's a harder lift because it takes me to identify the problem, convince the secretary, convince the congressional staff, go to the feds, DC, and beat them up to get the money. But that's the right way to do it. And so the answer is yes, I'll be willing to do that, but I would like to first run the trap lines either through private investments, which social impact bonds do, or to go back and beat up the feds to give us the money that they've been taken away from California. Okay? That clear? Any questions on that? I know it's kind of convoluted, long reason, but I do agree you need to do that. So thank you. Yes, sir. It depends on the region. Some places, but what you're doing, one of the interesting things, you could talk to Saddleback over here. What they did when I was watching them, they had huge community support. I mean, if you go to Saddleback, they actually have a veteran monument on the campus. It was all built by private donations from the community. You know, so you go to different areas. Maricosta is the same way. They just put the word out, and you have large veteran cantonments. Fresno, I mean, Fresno has one of the best centers for women who are suffering from homelessness and sexual trauma in the state when I was secretary. Fresno, I was surprised. I go, wow, Fresno's doing this. You have different cantonments. One of the things I think that what we don't do very well is you're going to start your program there. This Saddleback could give you the template, their books, and what they're doing and how they tied it in, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, using the Marine Corps term, you know, you're going on a deployment, don't rebuild the book. Just go to the last battalion that finished deployment, take it, change the names, and deploy. So I would do that. I'd go to Saddleback. I'd go to Maricosta. I guess Fresno over here has one. You guys get together. They could tell you how to do it and crosswalk you, and you'd save hours and days. And when you do that, invite crazies like me in. You know, I walk in, hey, I'm Colonel. I'm the Vice Chair of Veteran Affairs. I'm the Vice Chair of Higher Education. I'm on the Governor's Committee for maintaining the military. I'll spin and try to raise as much money as I can because, and it's not just me, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us that want to help our young veterans. So just don't, you're not alone, just don't reinvent the wheel, get it from somebody else, and when you do it, invite us. Bring us in so we can help you. You're not by yourself. It's a team. Anything else? Well, I'm going to finish it off, but I got to finish it off with a story. I always like a story. This year is going to be tough. This year is going to be tough because we got an election in 2014. Regardless of where you are in the Affordable Care Act and what's going to happen, you know, with the closing of Santa Ana Free, power is going to be, energy is going to be a big issue in Orange County, LA, and San Diego. We're bringing in Common Core and education, and I was listening to NPR this morning. They're saying like 60% of the parents don't even know what local control funding is, and the key component of local control funding is a parental involvement so that they're spending the money the best way they can. I've talked to a lot of school board members, and I said, you guys have been asking for years to allow you to control your own resources. Well, now you got it. The font of knowledge is not in Sacramento. But we do have a silver lining. And the silver lining is this. Leadership and an inspirational message that this state is on the poise to do great things. This state is a Pacific regional power. Mexico economy is going up. Mexico is one of the largest trading partners to the state of California, $28 billion right now. Because we are in the front of technology and energy and solar and wind and thermal, there's new industries developing. When you look at innovation in biochemistry and biotechnology, the leaders are in San Jose and San Francisco and San Diego. There's a lot of great entrepreneur spirit building here. And we got the biggest group of veterans in the entire nation, as I started earlier, who can drive the energy to get things done. But it only happens, we got big challenges, but we have the resources, we're positioned right. We need leaders like you, each one of you, to look the eyes of young people and say, we're going to change this state. We're going to make it work. We're going to get people educated. We're going to find collaborative models to make it work. We're not going to pick on each other. We're going to celebrate each other. Once California starts pulling together and not doing this Democrat-Republican crap and start working together, then we're going to get something done. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here, and go make it a better state. Thank you.